think of Liverpool, you think of the Mersey beat sound and the Beatles. But who put the beat in the Mersey beat? They say Lord Woodbine, known as the sixth Beatle, a Trinidadian musician who arrived on the Empire Windrush in 1948. These and other stories will be told throughout this documentary by the female descendants. Voices that often go unheard, but bear witness to the Windrush generation and the hostile environment created by the then Home Secretary Theresa May in 2012.
The first British ships arrived in the Caribbean in 1623, and despite slavery, despite colonisation, 25,000 Caribbeans served in the First World War and Second World War alongside British troops. When my parents and their generation arrived in this country under the Nationality Act of 1948, they arrived here as British citizens.
Caribbean migrants arrived in the UK in 1948 aboard the Empire Windrush after World War II to assist with labour shortages. People who arrived on the ship became known as the Windrush generation.
My association with the Windrush in the Caribbean is through my dad. He came on the Windrush in 1948 from Trinidad. He took a job, first of all, in Shropshire as a machinist, and then settled down in Liverpool. Prior to the Windrush, my father was in the RAF. He volunteered while he was in Trinidad when he was 14. He was underage, so he took his brother's passport. He had a stiff test to pass, and he was highly intelligent, so he passed it. And he probably looked about 12 because he always looked younger than he was. But he was accepted. When he came to England, he was trained at Filey in West Yorkshire. He trained as a flight engineer, so he was part of the air crew.
I mean, when I think back at the men from the Caribbean that I can remember interviewing when I was at the law centre, many worked in the munitions for the war effort. A good few people, as far as I understand it, were Jamaican fighter pilots in the Second World War, and came in when we didn't really have any air force to speak of, and we were being bombarded, and they came in and volunteered to fight off Hitler at that time. So I think that Caribbean people have made a great deal of contribution, and to the NHS, as we know. Many were trained nurses when they came, and came voluntarily. So yes, I think we've made a really good contribution.
Quite a few of us came, but we were sent to different hospitals. I was sent to Liverpool. I was on my own. I came on my own. And I was met at Lime Street by the British Council, who put me in a taxi and sent me to Aintree Hospital. I think I got to the hospital about 8 o'clock at night, and then one of the girls showed me around the nurse's home, and I started work the following morning at 7:30. I think we started at 7:30. That was my first job, really. I was at school, and from school I came here.
Under the 1948 Nationality Act, British Empire and its colonies had the right to remain and work in Britain. They were British subjects. But in June 1948, when Britain was welcoming the Windrush generation, the hostile environment had already begun in Liverpool. As the next chapter in the black history of Britain was beginning, Liverpool was reliving the nightmare of 1919, fueled by the colour bar policies of the National Union of Seamen White-Only Crews. This policy led to physical attacks on black people in Liverpool, whether they were seamen or not. What the new arrivals found out about themselves and each other from the late 1940s onwards, Liverpool had rehearsed and demonstrated over decades. John Belcham wrote, "Coloured colonials in Liverpool were the first to discover that there ain't no black in the Union Jack."
It is inhumane and cruel for so many of that Windrush generation to have suffered so long in this condition, and for the Secretary of State only to have made a statement today on this issue? Can she explain how many have been deported? She suggested earlier that she would ask the High Commissioners. It is her department that has deported them. She should know the number. Can she tell the House how many have been detained as prisoners in their own country? Can she tell the House how many have been denied health under the National Health Service? How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their job? This is a day of national shame, and it has come about because of a hostile environment policy that was begun under her Prime Minister.
Not forgotten is the death of Joy Angelina Gardner, a mature student aged 40 who died on the 1st of August 1993 following a disproportionate and cruel deportation attempt by British police officers. They tied her with a body belt. They shackled her hands and feet. 13 feet of tape was wrapped around her head and mouth. All of this in front of her 5-year-old son. Cause of death? Cerebral hypoxia, cardiac arrest. The alien deportation group now disbanded. DC Burrell cleared on the orders of the judge. DC Whitby found not guilty.
I'm one of the directors of Back on Track, which is an alternative education for excluded young people in the Liverpool 8 area. Okay, so I've lived in England from the age of 8, and I think I was at the age of 22, 23, when I realised with all the talks and the politics and stuff that, you know, they wanted to repatriate people and send them back home and, you know, we don't belong here and stuff, and I realised that, hang on, I've only got this little blue passport. And that's when I asked my parents, am I a British citizen? And both of them couldn't answer me. So I then found out that I wasn't a British citizen because I found out that when Jamaica became independent, which was 62, my parents came here 59. So anyone who came here after that was illegal, or supposed to be legal. So that's when I went and found out about how do I apply to become a British citizen, because I didn't want to be kicked out. I had my daughter at the time. So that 18 months of waiting to see whether I was going to be accepted was kind of stressful, because you were in the don't know, am I going to be, are they going to get rid? And if I was to be get rid, well, where am I going to live? Because, you know, the people who looked after me, who I thought was my parents at the time, had passed. I didn't really know any of my mum's family over there. So I'd say, yeah, that was a little bit stressful. So when my sister found out that she wasn't a British citizen, and well, the words they use are legal immigrant, that was quite stressful because she kept ringing me crying, you know, what am I going to do? Where am I going to live if they get rid of me? And, you know, I'm not well. And so it was mainly calming her down to saying, look, there's, you know, there's ways around this. And there was a lot of things going on around Windrush and stuff at that time where, you know, you could tap into. So it was just using the resources that I had and I knew to help to guide her into how she could go about getting hers. But it also made me realise that the piece of paper I thought was my birth certificate wasn't my birth certificate. It was just a registration of birth. So that process of applying to Jamaica to get one so that, you know, I could then send it off to her solicitors, because she had to do the same. Because they used my naturalisation paper of becoming a British citizen to help her to become indefinite leave to stay.
What happened here on the streets of Liverpool in the summer of 1946 was one of the most shameful episodes in Britain's post-war history. In a number of dawn raids, the police descended on the area, their mission to round up any Chinese seamen they could find. They went from house to house, loaded the men onto trucks, which took them down to the docks, where a boat was ready and waiting for their journey to China.
I was born in Chinatown, and I know the history of it and whatever. And, you know, my mum was friendly with people, who, you know, white women who were married to Chinese men, and their husbands just disappeared. And it's only now that I'm older that I realise how that happened, that they were just taken away. But even moving on from the Chinese community, I mean, in the law centre, we fought many deportations. I remember particularly fighting even for an African man who'd worked as a binman for many years, and for some reason he came up on a register of not having the right papers, and he left behind a wife and 5 children because they just took him and deported him. During the Congo War, they were just taking people who were here as asylum seekers and just taking them and putting them on planes and taking them back to the Congo.
According to records, what is not often heard is that at least 68 men from the Windrush came and settled in Liverpool and married local women. Also on board were Nancy Cunard, a black rights activist and disinherited shipping heir, Freya Stark, the travel writer, and Mona Baptiste, the saxophonist. What an extraordinary thing that these super footloose women were on the ship and nobody had recognised it.
I'm not directly involved, descended from the Windrush generation, but in saying that, I can associate with the trials and tribulations what those people went through and are still going through the amount of racism, the amount of oppression, the amount of injustice, what they went through.
Women judged by old taboos on sex and race.
I hadn't given it a thought that people would judge me by the fact that I was married to a white man.
Women who crossed the racial divide.
Just the most terrible thing that I could do was to be with a black man.
Now, coming from experience, it to me meant a lot, and it still means a lot. Because at first, when I was younger, I had no identity. I didn't know whether it was white. I couldn't fit in with white people. I didn't know whether I was black because I couldn't fit in with black people.
After his training, he went to Burton Wood in Warrington. Because there was a strong black community in Liverpool, my father, his Caribbean airmen and the black American airmen would go to Liverpool to the clubs and mingle in with the local community around Liverpool 8. There was a club called Jokers, and they would go there. There was a talent contest in Jokers, and my dad entered and my mum entered. My dad would have had a band, you know, of the Caribbean guys. They had bands while they were in the RAF. And anyway, my mum, she liked Ella, and she was a good jazz singer, and she won the talent contest, and that's how my mum and dad met.
We boarded the ship for England, not knowing what we would find. We believed the promises that were made and left our families behind. We were heading to this marvellous place where everyone was free. We would have a better life and help the economy. The journey was long, but the weather, it was kind. Looking to our new life, that's all that was on our mind. We disembarked at London, and everything had changed. No proper jobs or housing. Oh, England, what a shame. Oh, England, what a shame. We weren't illegal immigrants. We were invited to this country. We did the jobs you wouldn't do. We cleaned the factory and the streets. We even cleaned the loo. We weren't illegal immigrants. We paid our taxes just like you. All we asked for is what you promised. All we wanted was our due. My name is Nikki Simons. I was born in St. Vincent in the Grenadines. I was 3 years old when my mum left St. Vincent and came to England to train as a nurse. When my mother was in England, I stayed with my grandparents until I left to come to England. So that would be for nearly 14 years. When I arrived here at 14, it was devastating for me. It was a culture shock because I didn't know my mum. My mum had remarried, so there was also a person whom I'd never seen. I travelled on my own from St. Vincent. When I got to Liverpool, I had no memory of what my mum looked like. I saw lots of people walking around until there was nobody there. There was a couple, but I didn't know them. And I went to the information desk and told them that my mum was coming to meet me. They announced her name, and then I saw two people coming towards me. I just wanted to turn around and go back home.
My association with the Windrush and the Caribbean is down to the fact of my parents coming from the West Indies. More so, the two of them and my lineage came from Jamaica. My parents arrived on the fourth back of my grandmother. My grandmother was already here from the 30s, apparently. Now, she was in the Second World War. And then she sent for a son. He was born 1934, my dad, and he actually arrived in 1956. I would say they came to prosperity, really, coming from where they come from in Jamaica. Where they come from in Jamaica is very urban, very country, but at the same time, they were kind of prosperous in their own way in Jamaica. My grandmother married a pastor of the church, and to be a pastor in the colonial times, it kind of put you up in society. So with that now, she was able to come over to England, work in the war, and she actually started the building of the family. So my grandmother was the real pioneer or the matriarch into bringing over a lot of people from her family to Jamaica to settle. And hence my mother come and my father come. Now, when they came here, their first thing was to find employment. That's how my nan seen it. Everybody's employed, and you pay back your money into coming into England, which was now called the partner. Now, a partner in today's terms is quite like a tonny club where you put your money in and you get a lend hand. So this partner dedicated everybody's wages, and every week you would have to pay a piece. You'd pay a piece for your coming over to England, you would pay a piece for your rent, and you'd pay a piece for your food. So whatever was left out your wages could be 1 in 6. I used to hear that so often. Only 1 in 6 leave. That was them, to get to work, to travel, to get back home, and to put the wages back into the partner until they actually gained strength of holding their wage again by paying the debts.
When my dad went back to Trinidad after he'd finished in the RAF, that was 1947. He was in the RAF between 1943 and 1947. When he went back to Trinidad, he was singing calypso on street corners. How it was is people couldn't afford to buy newspapers, so he would, you know, sing calypsos, write calypsos about the local news, current affairs, or local gossip. Lord Kitchener had a few records out, and they used to have tents, like calypso tents, and Lord Kitchener had one called the House of Lords. He saw my dad, and he was really interested because he thought, he was funny, you know what I mean, and they were quite close. So in the House of Lords, you'd get Lord Beginner, Lord Kitchener. It was a rank, like on your skills as a calypsonian, you'd get the title Lord. And I think my dad said he wrote a song about cigarette brands, and one of the brands, characters were named after this, cigarettes, and one of the characters was Lord Woodbine, and he said that one night somebody shouted out Lord Woodbine, and the name stuck.
My father was a seaman who came from Barbados, But in Barbados, he was what they called a sugar pharmacist on the sugar plantations, the rum plantations. When he came to Liverpool, he was a travelled seaman. He'd been a seaman for many years, and then he decided to stay in Liverpool. Never quite got round to why he felt Liverpool was the place to stay, but I do know that in 1962, I was born, so you know that was possibly one reason why his decision to remain in this city. My father was employed in, I think, the car industry, so at that time it was Ford, Vauxhall in Liverpool. But what he became more prolific in and more encouraged and active in was community. So he was the manager of the Railtoe Youth Community Centre on Upper Parliament Street, right up until he retired.
My name is Judith Cummings, and I have been working as a mental health advocate for the last 24 years, but now retired. I was born in Trinidad several years ago now, and I came over with my parents to Liverpool in 1962. My parents' profession at the time, my father was a police officer, and my mom came over in 1962, just a little bit ahead of my dad, to train as a nurse. My mum's profession as a nurse started, I'll be honest with you, in Trinidad, when she's always wanted to go into the nursing profession. She was offered a scholarship to study here in Liverpool, but she originally went into London. From London, travelled up to Fazakerley Hospital and trained to become a general nurse practitioner. My mom was involved in the community on many levels. Although she retired from working within a mental health nursing environment at Olive Mount Hospital, she still continued to be involved in terms of, she was the first port of call for her neighbours, for her huge network of retired nurses, and also she believed in lifelong education. So she never ever stopped training and sort of self-development throughout her entire career. The hostile environment, I think, that is around today, my mother and father would find it very, very challenging, because when I think back, I actually arrived in 1962 with my dad. As I said, my mum came ahead of us, several months ahead of us, and it was hostile then in 1962. I remember sort of my mum and dad looking for rooms to rent. I remember going to London with my parents and seeing signs, although it didn't resonate with me, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And that stayed with them for many, many years. Now, jumping back to today, 2019, they would have found that absolutely appalling, but they would never, ever change the way they thought about you can excel in whatever you do, as long as you believe in yourself, believe in your family values, and dare to really take those leaps of faith and just excel despite the oppression that's around you. They would have actually lobbied for change, and they were advocates for change, encouragement and personal development, and also bringing the community along with them.
My dad has been referred to as the fifth or sixth Beatle because of his connection with the Beatles in their early career. I think Dr. James McGrath referred to him as the sixth Beatle, but the fifth Beatle was usually referred to people who'd been in the band, like Pete Best or Stu Sutcliffe or even Brian Epstein. It was just a term, not to say that, didn't always mean that you'd been in the Beatles. It was just you were connected with them in some way. My dad was involved with them in their early days. He managed the Jacaranda for Alan Williams in 1958-59, and he also had a resident steel band playing there, and so he knew them. He'd talk about them, coming in and begging for bacon butties, because he used to make them when he was working there, and it was like, in those days, it was like a coffee bar. You didn't have like alcohol served there. And they'd hang around the steel band, and they'd ask him things like, how, what can we do for our group and that, and he would talk to them. And he also had his own club, the Colony Club, And I think there was a strip club that Alan Williams, he managed for Alan, and he got the Beatles to play there. I think it was only in existence about a week or two or something like that. And then, you know, him and Alan took the Beatles out to Germany. And with Alan, it was like my dad and Alan were business partners. It was, you know, it was an equal thing. They were joint managers or agents, whatever it was. They were joint. And a lot of people don't know that, you know.
If my mother and father were alive today, the notion of any sort of disparity between non-British citizens and anybody who's sort of coming into the UK, they would have found that absolutely appalling. They came from a background where they believed in the unity of whatever culture you came from, a welcoming for those who were maybe coming to better themselves, to bring their culture, to bring their knowledge with them. And really, they came to England for the benefit of not only themselves as a family, but to engage with the community around them and to really take all that was good from the community and move on. They would have found it very, very difficult to handle and to deal with.
How I am associated with the Windrush generation is through my family, primarily my grandmother, who came to England in 1959 from Barbados. How people from the Caribbean have influenced my life is in every way. I feel, especially my grandma, she taught me to be, to believe in myself, to respect others, but she also taught me a certain way of carrying myself. Stand tall, you know, you don't roll over for anybody. Basically, she used to have a saying, and she used to say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And that's kind of my motto for life. I always try to be the person that if I see something wrong, I speak up, whether it directly affects me or not. And that was the kind of person that my grandma was, so I feel like I got a lot of that from her.
At first, it was very hard because I had never worked before and I didn't have a clue. Everything was different. Everything was called something different. We call a basin. And at home, in hospital, the nurses will say to you, go and bring me a bowl. And you think, a bowl? Where would I get a bowl? So, until somebody explained to me that a bowl was a basin, what we call a basin. It was so confusing. I couldn't understand the Liverpool accents, and I don't think they could understand mine either. I remember the consultant saying, 2 weeks ago, you came here 2 weeks ago and you couldn't speak a word of English, and now you're fluent in English. And I looked at him and I thought, but English is the only language I've got. So what was I speaking then?
Well, when the Windrush did arrive back in Tilbury, and there was a good ratio, a divided ratio of black people and the Polish refugees. The images what I ever seen in my life that recalled of people even coming off the gangway, coming off the ship, with little black children, black people, dressed to the hilts. Now, the recognition that the Polish were ever on that ship was like laying. Nobody ever heard about it, but it was only the black people now that have been focused to be what? Illegal. Same people on the same ship. It didn't stop in one place. It stopped in many places. But the focus was left on the division of the colour of the person's skin. And that's all I can put it to today.
My dad has influenced me in my life. It's probably more unconscious than conscious, but, you know, he was a front runner in many ways, and it's like I've always strived to, you know, just go and do something if I want to do it.
In the past, I felt as if I didn't really have a home because of my colour and my background, and I often wondered whether, you know, am I part African or am I part British or what? But now, as I've grown and I've come to understand myself, and met so many positive people who I've spoken to and who've influenced me, and gave me positive, you know, feedback for what I've got to say. Britain is my home, and I'm a good, proud British Liverpool girl. Black girl, anyway.
So the positive things I'm doing myself within the community to improve representation of black people, particularly black women. I am 1/3 of a collective based here in Liverpool, which is 3 working class women from L8, myself, 2 other ladies, and we are working towards supporting and empowering and directing women to achieve in their own communities.
I work with all groups and I work with all communities, and I promote all cultural communities of Liverpool, not just the African and Caribbean, you know, and I get involved with lots of other diverse groups and I have good understanding. So I also make sure that people know what opportunities there are from NML, so they can actively get involved in the future. So I'm very pleased and privileged, and I'm sure my father would have been jumping up and down with pride at that acknowledgement. He would have been really pleased and proud of my role as chief exec in Cumber, because that's literally round the corner from where he was, and a very similar building. But I think he would have been like super duper proud as well of me actually sitting on such an important board in the city that is the biggest, you know, employer in terms of culture of our city.
I also think that the government ought to be legally challenged at a human rights level, not just doing individual cases, but a human rights lawyer ought to take them to the Court of European Human Rights and challenge them openly on that, and a massive fund should be set up in order to fund that.
Because I came to England at a later stage in my life, the people who influenced my life have been mainly people from at home in St. Vincent. And the person, I think, who had the most influence on me was my grandmother. She was kind, loving, fair, taught me to be proud of who I am, what I am, to respect people, to always treat people equally, irrelevant of their status in life.
I think altogether we are very, very blessed as a community, as a family, growing up in Liverpool, because I think we're very, very proud of the diverse environment that we find ourselves in, and that is actually, it really has propelled us to excel no matter what part of the globe that our family unit may find themselves in.
I think I've taken the strength of my mother, the things my mother instilled in me when I was growing up. I've taken her advice, not all of it, some of it, but I've taken quite a bit of what she said. She influenced me a lot. I married steadily, and we had 2 children, 2 daughters, Gail and Alison. They're both grown up now. I have got children of their own, and I've got 4 grandchildren, 3 boys and 1 girl.
So I make wedding dresses. I do made to measure for people, where you can't go into town and buy something specific to fit your length, your height, your size. And I love women who have different size, where I can just make something to fit that they go away feeling so powerful.
I describe my cultural identity as Black British. If I was to go to Jamaica, I'm not Jamaican enough. And when I stay in England, I'm not English enough, but I'm British. And this is where I'm born. And I love where I'm born. And I love the versatility and the flowers and the colours that come out of where I'm born, and for what people have brought to this country to me, from spices to flowers to migration. It's only made this place more fruitful.
The hostile environment is a very real thing. and we need to be supporting our Windrush and Commonwealth British citizens and put pressure on the powers that be to make sure that we bring a stop to the hostile environment and the tedious and tenacious assault against our Windrush generation for their deportation from the UK.
So today is about counteracting that and raising awareness of the huge contribution that the Windrush generation has brought to the UK.
I mean, today, hopefully, what we will also do is bring this historical perspective to our young people, celebrating their families, their grandparents, their great-grandparents who came here and made such a vital contribution. So Windrush hopefully will be celebrated every year now, as we will have National Windrush Day, and we'll remember those who have come and those who will be coming in the future to support us here.
That's brilliant. The television and the newspapers, it seemed there weren't many places we could turn to without finding ourselves confronted by some form of racism on a daily basis.